Hello, I'm Annette Young and welcome to the 51%, a show about women reshaping our world. Coming up, less than a quarter of mayoral candidates standing in the French local elections are female, but we head to the French city of Nantes where the opposite is happening. Also, gearing up for the Generation Equality Forum, which will be held this year in Mexico City and Paris, we'll be talking to the event's Secretary-General Delphine O on what this international gathering is hoping to achieve. And the film industry in France finds itself in the middle of a firestorm after film director Roman Polanski, who's facing rape accusations, wins Best Director at the French equivalent of the Oscars. But we begin here in France, which is holding municipal elections later this year. Of those standing as mayoral candidates across the country, only 23% are women, although this is a slight increase from only 17% in 2014. However, the French city of Nantes is bucking the national trend, as Karina Chabot and Peter O'Brien report.
C'est aussi des choses très concrètes. C'est un combat de tous les jours. C'est se battre pour ne pas être infantilisé, pour ne pas qu'on nous coupe la parole aussi souvent et pour qu'on respecte notre parole.
These 5 candidates for mayor are well qualified to debate the role of women in society.
Le féminisme, en parler, c'est bien. Le faire, c'est mieux.
In Nantes, France's 6th largest city, 6 out of the 9 main contenders in the municipal election are women, a fact some locals couldn't be more proud of.
The more a society has women working in all kinds of jobs, politics, military, police, justice, the better that society is.
Although the list of candidates each party puts forward for each council must be made up of an equal number of men and women, the top of the list, who's usually the candidate for mayor, can be of either gender. In this, Nantes is an exception. Across the country as a whole, less than a quarter of people topping the lists are women, though this is a slight increase from only 17% 6 years ago. Back then, Nantes was one of the few places to elect a woman, and she's running again this time around.
In 2014, it was an issue. People wanted to talk to me about it. 6 years later, it's not much of a talking point. That's good, not just for women in politics, but for women everywhere who question what they're able to achieve.
Laurence Garnier of the right-wing Republicans Party came second in 2014 and plans to get her own back, promising to tackle job insecurity. She says coming from the motor industry has made things easier.
Coming from a job in industry, a very masculine sector, I wasn't hindered by the fact I'm a woman when I switched to politics. Politics is still, for the most part, run by men, though things are changing.
Something that hasn't changed yet is the fact that the proportion of women who are main candidates in large cities greatly outnumbers that of small towns. In cities, around a third of candidates for mayor are women, compared to just over a fifth for municipalities with less than 2,000 residents.
Now, later this year, France will co-host with Mexico what's being called the Generation Equality Forum. Women's groups, along with government representatives, will be meeting in early May in Mexico City and again in early July here in Paris. The event, of course, marking 25 years since that iconic Beijing conference in 1995, where 189 countries signed off on an agreement to achieve gender equality. The then US First Lady Hillary Clinton at the time famously declaring at the meeting that human rights are women's rights and women's rights are human rights. Joining me now in the studio is Ambassador Delphine O, the Forum's Secretary-General. Thank you so much for your time,
Hello.
Ambassador. We're now 25 years on since that historic event, and and I assume you would like to think that progress has been made, but just recently a survey has been released by the UN Development Programme which reveals that almost 90% of people are biased against women, 91% of men and 86% of women. I imagine those sort of figures are not really good news, are they?
You're right. And as you say, 25 years ago, the entire international community came together. It was truly a historical moment. It was the first time that all member states of the UN, together with civil society and international organizations, recognized this very simple fact, very obvious, that women's rights are human rights and human rights are women's rights.
So what is holding us back?
So 25 years ago, it was all about rights. but there was no really pathway and roadmap for action. It was very important to enshrine these rights in the Beijing Declaration and the Platform for Action. But the member states did not give the means, the financial means, the political means to achieve these rights. So here we are 25 years later. Some progress has been made. At that time, we had only, I think, 3 or 5 women head of state and government. Today, we have 21. Still not perfect, as you can say. But today, yes, the progress is not entire, completely achieved. 130 million girls are still waiting to be in school. Many, many girls are still forced into forced marriages or endure FGM. And there are still only 25% women parliamentarians around the world. So the Generation Equality Forum that we will co-host with Mexico and at the convening of UN Women is all about action, 25 years after enshrining the rights. This is about implementing the rights and accelerating the implementation.
Now, the event's goal is to further define on how to achieve gender equality by 2030. That's only 10 years away. Is that possible?
Actually, our program for action is between 2020 and 2025. We recognize that at the pace that we're currently going, it's very likely we will not achieve the SDGs and the Agenda 2030 of the UN. So we decided to focus on a set of 6 priorities, 6 action coalitions that would gather sort of the coalition of the willing. Member states, international organizations, of course NGOs, youth movements, also the private sector that was not present in 1995 in Beijing, and men and boys. We need all the goodwills around the table to advance and accelerate this movement for action.
What do you personally want to see this forum achieve?
The forum will just be the starting point of these next 5 years. I would like to see us in 5 years reconvening after the action coalitions have been launched and have completing their objectives. And I want to together come in 5 years and see that we can effectively accelerate when we have more stakeholders around the table. Because for a long time, this has been only the fight fought by feminist organizations that were silenced, still repressed in many parts of the world, underfunded. Today, this fight is global. UN Women is at the helm of it. France, as you know, with this feminist diplomacy that President Macron is carrying together with Minister Schiappa, is also at the forefront of this fight.
Now, you talked there about this country having a feminist diplomacy. In fact, one of the 3 Republican values is indeed égalité. Equality in English. Yet when it comes to the country's ambassadors, it is lagging behind, with only 32% of its ambassadors being women and only 25% of women being in senior positions in the field of diplomacy. Do you think that's a sign of a government truly committed to feminism?
I think the change is slow, but it's still changing. I am sort of the embodiment of this. I was appointed as an ambassador, as a woman, and also as a pretty young woman for this post. There's been a number of nomination appointments last year. For instance, our ambassador to NATO is a woman, to a number of international organizations. But we also started from very low, I have to say. And the progress, we as women diplomats working inside the Ministry of Foreign Affairs are pushing for this change to be a bit faster. And so 2 days ago, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Jean-Yves Le Drian, announced that he wants to reach by 2025 50% of women's appointed as ambassadors, which is actually above the threshold given by the law that we passed a number of years ago.
And do you think France is doing enough, for instance, in the region of the Middle East, where there are many countries there that still lag way behind when it comes to women's rights, particularly Iran and Saudi Arabia?
I would say, unfortunately, not only in the Middle East, in many, many parts of the world. And what we can see now is this pushback against women's rights is not restricted to those countries where we're used to. There are a number of countries, including in our own European Union, across the Atlantic, they're also pushing back against women's rights and pushing for a conservative agenda. So France, I think, is at the forefront of this fight to defend women's rights as they are enshrined in UN conventions, international resolutions, but also to implement action. That's why the president has instructed our Agency for Development, the Agence Française de Développement, to dedicate 50% of its bilateral and multilateral aid to gender-oriented projects by 2022.
Delphine O, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Now, there's still much buzz here in France after actor Adele now stormed out of the theatre when Roman Polanski was announced as the winner for Best Director at the César, the French equivalent of the Oscars. The filmmaker is facing a series of rape accusations. So, is the country's film industry finally having its very own Me Too moment?
Roman Polanski pour J'accuse.
It was an award show unlike any France has seen. The evening pitted those from the industry in favour of controversial film director Roman Polanski with those against. And it's a battle of ideas which continues.
We have a problem talking about violence in France, specifically violence against women, because it's one of those concepts that doesn't exist in our popular culture. To do that work, it's tough. It's necessary that it's collective, because the violence against women is an epidemic.
Parce que c'est une épidémie, en fait, les violences faites aux femmes.
The Césars had faced mounting pressure since Polanski and his film An Officer and a Spy were nominated for 12 awards. The board of the Academy has since resigned, and a petition to overhaul the awards has been unveiled. While the industry debates its identity, small changes have been taking place on film sets in France.
Aujourd'hui, un référent qui est nommé sur chaque tournage de film.
Today there's a point person that's nominated for each shoot, so that if ever there's a problem concerning anything, that person can be reached for complaints. Then there's also an incentive to hire technicians or artists that are women. We accumulate points. What that means is you get a financial bonus when you hire more women on French sets today.
For now, it's too early to tell if France is witnessing its own version of the Me Too movement. But what's clear is some in the industry have acknowledged it can no longer be more of the same.
And that's it for now. You can also connect with us via our Facebook page, that of course being France24.51%, or do send us a tweet at _51%. So until our next show, bye for now.